everyone to the Aptucxet Museum campus, and thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for your interest in the maritime history of Bourne and Cape Cod. Thank you for your support of the Bourne Historical Society. Recognized tonight is the 232nd anniversary of the Battle of Nantucket, an encounter between residents of the island of Nantucket, loyal to Britain, a British frigate, and a band of revolutionary privateers from Aptucxet, a village on the South Sea of Sandwich at that time. Tonight we will hear from some of the characters that inspired the man who held the privateers' commission from the colonial government, Levi Barlow. To start, we would like you to meet Levi Barlow's grandmother, Bessie Barlow, and Marshall Barlow.
You okay?
Paul.
Let's do it.
Welcome. Thank you for coming this evening. Tonight you're going to hear a tale of the Revolutionary War and things that lead up to it. Some of it is fact and some of it is folklore. But it all works out together in the end. I'm Bessie Barlow. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about our family. I was a widow with two young girls, and I married George Barlow. I was his second wife, and he was my second husband. And he was from England. He was known as the Beast of Sandwich. But we'll get back to that a little bit later. But when he first came from England, he was a minister in Wells, a town close by here. And he took the fire and brimstone one step farther. He not only told them what they were all going to do, he pointed them out and named them, and named whatever the thing that they had done wrong in front of everyone. Well, after a while, the court said, no, you can't do this any longer because people will get so upset. So he was told he could not ever preach again. So he went to sea. And in his journey at sea, he ended up in Sandwich. And he looked around, and he was looking for a position, so he saw a marshal there. So he decided he'd pick out all the things that he's doing wrong, and that he could do better. And he did succeed. They let him go, and George became the marshal. He took his job very seriously. In fact, the court said they wanted them to get rid of the Quakers, to have the Quakers move out of Sandwich and Plymouth. He took this to heart. He spoke to them and said, you know, you really have to go. They didn't go. He went and took their livestock, their cows. They still didn't go. Then he really hit home. He took their cooking pots, so they had no pots to cook with. But they were a very stubborn group. They still didn't go. Then he decided it was going to be physical punishment. He started cutting their ears off or notching them. Just the way you do with feral cats now. You notch the ears so you know who they are. Well, that's what he did. They finally did move on, but the town decided that this was a little bit too severe. So they retired the marshal, gave him some land quite a distance away from the center of Sandwich, and he spent his time living there. One of the things he liked to do best is drink. And I had all these pots that he had brought home from these people, and that's what we made the liquor in. And he sat and he was very happy drinking. Well, my two daughters weren't necessarily very happy with him at the time. So they sort of were a little bit abusive physically to him, beating him up and throwing him right out in the mud. Well, the new marshal heard about this and said, wait a minute, this cannot happen. So he came and he charged the girls, and they ended up being sent to the stocks, except one of the 13-year-olds, she was pregnant. So her time in the stock was let go.
And now I'd like to introduce to you Captain Edward Barlow. Captain.
Captain Edward Barlow, distant relatives of the Barlow family of Cape Cod. Okay. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, okay. However, they knew of my adventures, especially those of my encounter with Captain Kidd. You know who he is, or was. Kidd was a New York lawyer who had convinced a number of wealthy individuals to support his ventures in piracy, promising riches beyond imagination. Kidd's supporters brought him a very large vessel and provided all the needed supplies to set sail with a very large crew. Kidd roamed the world with little success, although he would take needed stores where he could, but he never seemed to be in the right place at the right time. He then turned his thoughts in desperation to alternative methods. He preyed on the English ships and his own people, so to speak. I was sailing my vessel, the Scepter, with a small fleet for the East India Company off the coast of Madagascar when Kidd approached with his huge vessel crewed by thieves and scallywags. They slowed as they approached, yelling threats and sailing close, separating us from our fleet. We feigned surrender. We loaded our cannons. As the large vessel slowed, she turned broadside, and as she passed, we fired our cannons and guns. Luckily, we struck their rudder, breaking it clear from the ship. This left them adrift on the open ocean with little or no steerage. We moved and rejoined our fleet, leaving them adrift with little steering ability. Once in port, we reported the attack to the proper authorities. Kidd was eventually brought to justice for this attack and others. Kidd's head was cut off and placed on a stake in a harbour of England for crimes on the oceans of the world. This was a clear message to anyone considering his particular course of action at the time. The Barlow boys of Aptucxet admired this sort of courage. Drink up, guys.
Thank you, Captain Edward Barlow. Recognize that Captain Edward Barlow's records were considered exceptional and are now a part of a collection at the Essex Peabody Museum. In the 1770s, as independence was declared from England, different groups saw different opportunities approaching. The 5 Barlow boys, in their late teens and early 20s, were well known in the Sandwich area. Both the town selectmen and the Barlows saw the growing need for certain goods in the near future. The selectmen were aware that the young men were skilled navigators and they were fearless, not surprised. They instructed their constable at that time, Mr. Swift, to confiscate their sails. According to Mr. Swift, the Barlows had already set sail when he arrived in their port, which was Aptucxet. They had already left. They returned weeks later with a much-needed shipment of goods purchased in the British West Indies, claiming they were unaware of the selectmen's decision. Soon, Levi Barlow had obtained a privateer commission from the colonial government of Massachusetts. He and his crew roamed the waters south of Cape Cod, doing whatever they could to support the revolution. Nantucket Island had chosen to remain under English rule, as many of the residents of the island roamed the oceans of the world in their whaling endeavors. And now I'd like you to meet Gerard, the innkeeper of the inn on Nashon Island at Tarpaulin Cove. Gerard.
I am Gerard, the innkeeper of the inn on Tarpaulin Cove that is in Nashon Island. The inn is seen as a halfway point between New York and Boston. I took over this business when I was younger, shortly after Captain Kidd made his final voyage from New York to Boston. He buried treasure along the way, hoping to eventually bargain for a pardon from his high seas crimes. I personally believe Kidd buried his treasure near a very large oak tree on the island near my inn. I have spent most of my life looking for this treasure. In my duties as innkeeper here, I met most everyone who passed by, as many stopped for a spell, get fresh water and meal refreshments, and light conversation. a lot of conversation. I often overhear these conversations and sometimes share information with others that have shared with me. I support the revolution in my heart, yet I appear to be a neutral as a business person. The British often steal the local sheep and could easily loot my inn. I have to be very neutral. I know Levi Barlow and his crew well. They have frequented the inn for years, often sharing goods gathered by the British ships, gathered from British ships on Nantucket Island. Recently, a large British frigate anchored in the harbor overnight. The captain and a few of his officers came in for some fare. They were very interested in Levi Barlow and his vessel and his whereabouts. I gave them very little information, claiming not to know him well. I wonder what this is all about.
And now you're going to meet the daughters of Storekeeper Coffin. Girls?
I am Elizabeth Coffin.
And I'm her younger sister, Mahitable.
Our father owned and operated the largest dry goods mercantile store on the island of Nantucket.
Our father was a very honorable and well-respected man around the island. But during the Revolution, Levi Barlow and his crew would come to our island, a port loyal to England, part of the British Empire. He would present his colonial papers, and then he and his crew would steal whatever they wanted.
We are British. They had no right to come and steal from us. We knew this was wrong, and after several years of this behavior, the local merchants of the island decided to put a stop to it. Our father agreed to be their spokesman.
The next time Levi Barlow and his crew came to port, the merchants were ready. However, Barlow and his men, having heard the rumors of the rebellion, went right to our father's store. Other merchants were gathered there, and an argument quickly escalated. Suddenly, Mr. Swift, Levi Barlow's second in command, pulled out his pistol and shot my father, our father, in the stomach. He was quickly pronounced dead, and not a sound was heard.
Mahitable and I are driven to even the score with that bastard and his crew. We want to see the day that he shakes in his boots and dies an untimely death.
So, in the spring of 1882, when a British frigate moored in our harbor, we decided to go and talk to the captain.
We approached the captain and expressed our desire to see Levi and his crew brought to justice. Soon he returned to discuss the plan with us to capture the Barlow ship and crew. The plan was simple. The British frigate would patrol the Sound for a time and allow the Barlow vessel, the Speedwell, to tie up to the wharf in the harbor.
Local residents were to attack from behind a barrier of shipping boxes and whale oil barrels. They were going to be placed strategically on the dock. The residents' task was to set fire to the vessel as the British frigate came into the harbor and would destroy the vessel.
The plan had assumed Levi and his crew would surrender rather than be killed. The plan assumed they would be trapped on the wharf.
This plan did work for a time. Levi's vessel was spotted, headed for Nantucket right in the Sound, and the British captain stayed in the Sound, paying no mind to Barlow's ship.
Thank you, girls. And now, the story of the Speedwell and the Battle of Nantucket, being celebrated on the 232nd anniversary this very night, will be presented by Captain Levi Barlow, the courageous captain of the Speedwell. He is being portrayed by Galen Skip Barlow, a direct lineal descendant. Captain.
Thank you. as the girls have alluded to, we sailed into the harbor. We'd seen the British ship in the distance, but it didn't seem that interested in us. And it was becoming early evening, and there's a light fog, and the wind was blowing really light. And we decided we'd go into the harbor and tie up to Straight Wharf and spend the night. And then we'd go about our business in the morning, gathering our needed necessities, and we would leave Nantucket. As we approached the wharf, we noticed that there seemed to be a lot more boxes and barrels and things like that on the wharf. And just as we touched the wharf and started to throw our lines, people came up from behind these barrels and these buckets of boxes and barricades, and they began firing muskets at us right off. We weren't ready for this. We had some explosive devices on board, and my brother Nathan scurried right up the rat lines, and he lit what we had was a little bomb. These little bombs were like little jugs, and they had oyster shells in them and black powder and a small fuse. And when you lit them and threw them on the dock and they blew up, they would explode, and the oyster shells would go everywhere and cut anybody within 30 or 40 feet. And we had an abundance of these on board. We only had one cannon. We didn't have a lot of muskets. We had a few pistols. So there was a little skirmish right there, and we didn't even tie up. We just kind of hit the dock and we pushed off because we could see them coming, and they had torches. And they were running to the edge, and they were trying to throw their torches at us. But we were stopping them with these bombs that we were throwing on the dock. And we got free. But we didn't realize that the British frigate drew like 12 feet of water, and we only drew like 6 or 8 feet of water. So the British frigate was following us into the harbor, but had run aground. And when English ships, these frigates, we only had one cannon. A British frigate would have 8 or 10. So they had all these cannons. So we were in big trouble. We knew it. We could see the mast of the ship as we turned to head out of the harbor. We could see this huge ship just outside the harbor. But it was starting to lean kind of funny because they were aground. And what the British normally did when they'd run aground was they'd move all their cannons to one side of the vessel to try and get the vessel to tip enough so that the keel would come up and they could get off the bar that they were on. It was common. So they rolled all their cannons to one side of the ship, and the ship laid way over, but they were still aground. But they were leaning away from the channel. So as the speedwell came out, the speedwell couldn't get a good shot at their deck. Had they leaned the other way, the deck would have been totally exposed right to them, but it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was leaning over the other way. So anything that they could fire, and they only had one cannon, it would go right over the boat. They couldn't really do much damage to the British boat. They hit it a couple of times, but they had a small cannon with 4-pound cannonballs, which is almost like throwing tomatoes at them. It just wasn't working out for them, or for us. So we were firing it, and they had big cannons. And because of the angle, they were able to fire at us. And they took down our topsail and the top part of our mast. But while this was happening, these girls and all the residents had run from the pier down to the beach because they could see it. And it was just this time of day and the sun was just setting. And they were all on the beach cheering because they wanted us to get killed. You know, this was war, guys. They wanted us dead. And they were really screaming and yelling, and they were really seemed to be enjoying themselves. And we had our mast shot down. We got hit a couple times. The boat was sinking. But we got clear of this British frigate. The British frigate, the tide was still going. It just kept getting worse aground. We got out into the Sound. We repaired our mast and our sail as best we could. And we bailed all night. We had buckets, and we were down on the hold, and we were bailing all night, keeping this boat floating. And we sailed up to Aptucxet Bay because we really didn't know where we were going. We were just trying to get back to the Cape. And we got into Aptucxet Bay. Then we knew where we were. And we grounded the boat because the boat was going to sink anyway. So we grounded it right there. And some of the crew followed the Native American paths, and they walked back to Aptucxet. My brother Nathan and I, on the other hand, we walked to a friend named Lot Dimmick, who lived in Falmouth, North Falmouth. And Lot had some men, and he was also involved in the revolution, and he had some small boats. So we decided that we'd sail back to Nantucket early the next day. So it was a day went by, and we sailed back in these small boats posing as fishermen, and we got into Nantucket Harbor about 4 o'clock in the morning, just as the sun was starting to come up, and we sailed right up to this British ship and climbed aboard, and we captured the captain right off. We had our muskets right on him. We had him. We had him have his crew sail that boat back to Falmouth with us aboard, and we captured that boat. So we captured that British frigate, and it was disposed of by the colonial government. And that was one of 16 captures that happened during the revolution that were credited to the privateer Levi Barlow. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain. We'd like to recognize all the players this evening. Jane Bessie Barlow, Judy McAllister, Marshall Barlow, the Beast of Sandwich, Brian McDonald, Captain Edward Barlow, Mike Eden, Gerard the Innkeeper, Paul Gerard, Elizabeth and Mahitable Coffin, are Shauna and Haley, granddaughters of Skip Barlow, and of course, the colonial privateer, the hero of the Battle of Nantucket, Captain Levi Barlow, Skip. Thank you. We invite you to stay. There are some refreshments. There are some interesting items that are of historic significance as we're all collecting mementos at this time of the canal celebration. And it's a beautiful evening to look at the canal. Thank you again for your support and being with us.